Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I just want to, riff on some topics that I've been discussing. A lot of people have asked me, like, how come you don't allow comments in your under your YouTube videos? Well, because I do my contemplation elsewhere. I basically do my contemplation either on actualize.org with people, people leaving comments under my videos or under anybody's videos. I really don't find that particularly helpful. I just rather not kind of muddy my waters that way. I mean, there's, obviously people are going to be like, oh, you don't, reflect enough or whatever. I've spent years on self-help and spirituality forums. Basically, that's all I've done pretty much for the last 10 years is have deep discussions with people about spirituality and about self-help and these kinds of topics, philosophy. So, what I want to do in this video is basically just kind of, I want to forecast something. This is going to be my last spirituality video for a while because honestly, I'm just getting a little fatigued with the spirituality stuff. And I want to go back to what we were doing with the self-help stuff. So next week's video is going to pick up on the Clarity Jumpstart follow-up, which is basically we're going to be looking at, what we've done, how many of our projects we've gotten done, how many of our routines we've gotten established. And I'll share my results because of the fact that I've been spending so much time on spirituality. That stuff has kind of been on hold, honestly. But that's just the way things go. You know what I'm saying? There's two sides to this. There's kind of like the spirituality side, and then there's the very practical side. And sometimes you're going to waffle back and forth, and don't feel bad about that. It just is what it is, but you don't want to lose sight. You can pick up where you left off, so to speak. But what I want to do in this video is I want to just do kind of like a spirituality video and just say, first of all, like I'm grateful for anybody who's interacted with me in the last, 90 days or so. I really feel like we're, like I said, like a huge community doing this stuff, and people have been very polite with me, and hopefully I've been, polite with other people too. Even though we can disagree, it's still important to I think be respectful. And that's been the case, in my interactions, even online, surprisingly. But I also want to say, too, that absolute love, which is kind of what I want to talk about in this video, I think. Absolute love, in a way, is expecting disagreement. I think one of the things that is a barrier to absolute love is when you're trying to bring truth into love. And this is where a lot of people are going to disagree with me. They're going to say, no, like love just is. Absolute love just is the practical embodiment of absolute truth. Right? That's a thesis that you'll hear a lot of people say. And that's fine, right? I'm glad that you have that point of view. Right now we can have a conversation. I will say this, my view, which is different, is that absolute truth is a prerequisite, but doesn't fully encapsulate absolute love. And here's how I would describe that. What absolute truth is groundedness. What does this mean? This basically means that you expect disagreement, but you're not going to carry that disagreement with you, right? See, I think the ego, which is me and you, right, the finite perspective, assumes that we want other people to agree with us, right? Because we mistake absolute truth with people agreeing with us. But this isn't the case at all. That's totally flipped around the wrong way. Absolute truth is a groundedness in the I am that comes before any disagreement, including your own disagreement with other people. So you see yourself as a finite perspective, not as an unconditioned blah. Right? Your character, your small self, you see as a finite perspective among other finite perspectives. So even your own point of view is not absolute truth. Now, absolute truth contains your point of view, but that's not what absolute truth is pointing to. Absolute truth is pointing to the you that is completely secure and completely stable spiritually. Even from your own spiritual commentary, right? It's a pillar. It's a pillar that comes from inside. That's what absolute truth is. And it's really hard to kind of describe it. But one thing you can tell if somebody doesn't fully have absolute truth, and this is what I kind of agree with, is they get defensive when somebody disagrees with them. Now, you can still get defensive. There's no problem with that. But deep down inside, spiritually, you're not going to be moved by somebody disagreeing with you. You're not going to be unsettled by disagreement. You're going to be totally, like there's going to be a groundedness inside of you. That's basically what absolute truth is. Is absolute truth solipsism? No, that's a philosophy, right? That's absolute truth. It really can't be put into words because it's a state of being. As soon as you put it into words, now you're communicating it in the finite, right? Your finite self is communicating that to other finite selves. Now, what I don't really, like a lot of, Advaita Vedanta people want to do, I don't think that the relative is an illusion. In other words, I don't have a bright line duality between the absolute and the relative. So, I still allow preference to be here and to be real even. It just doesn't unsettle me spiritually anymore, right? And that's when you know that you've basically found absolute truth, is when you can say to yourself, I can disagree with somebody without carrying that comparative animosity. Like if somebody were to walk up to me and say, Joseph, and people have, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I've gotten all kinds of feedback from people. If somebody were to come up to me and say, I wholeheartedly disagree with your spirituality, I think you're a blah, 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 I'd look at that person and go, great, right? I'm glad you have an opinion, right? Think about this. I love this hypothetical. Imagine you're sitting on a bus, right? And some guy just comes up to you and says, hey man, I want you to know that you're God and that you're wrong and, everything about you is blah, blah. You're going to look at this guy and you're going to go, you know what I mean? It's like a housefly buzzing around your head or a bird chirping in the forest. Does this mean that you're going to react to that person that way? No. I mean, your ego might still say, hey man, I'm not interested. Thank you. You know what I'm saying? Or something like that. You're going to react because yes, you are concerned with survival. You're concerned with your own comforts, right? Nobody should take any kind of abuse, from anybody or any kind of, if somebody's being a nuisance to you, you're going to move away, right? Naturally. Doesn't mean that you have to hurt that person. You can literally just kind of like go sit somewhere else on the bus, right? Or something along those kinds of lines. You don't have to put up with somebody's nonsense. But also, you can realize too that your ego has preferences and also wants to be right and tell other people. You want to give your nonsense to other people too, right? So think about it. Every finite perspective in a way is kind of sharing their nonsense with other finite perspectives. This is not a bug. This is a feature. This is a play actually. It's normal. So if you don't like this, that's a problem. Right? Because your ego is going to try to control other people who disagree with you. That's not absolute truth. That's your ego's sense of truth, which is here too. So you're going to watch yourself react to other people. You're going to watch yourself call other people names and categorize other people and so on and so forth. But even when you watch yourself, when you see the ego in yourself, you can see the ego in other people, and then you can see the difference between that and absolute truth. Absolute truth is where you go, I expect this, right? It's not necessarily good, right? Because good is a value judgment, see? But it's a play, it's an interplay. And you're part of it as a small self too. You're a character. I think of everybody as being kind of like, it's like a vaudeville play. And you're a character in the play, right? Even with yourself, right? There's a finite perspective there that you're aware of. So your ego is here. And, the finite perspective, it's all here. Other people's finite perspectives. And when you attach too much to the ego, you're going to feel that your truth is threatened in some way. And so that's what absolute truth corrects for. Nobody can destabilize truth. Right? Nobody can destabilize truth. So you're inside, even as you're sort of like observing things happening in space and time, your sense of stability is never undermined as the self or as the I am. That's what absolute truth is. And so there is a correlation between somebody who has absolute truth and non-reactivity. But this doesn't mean that you are always non-reactive, because you have preferences. Your ego never goes away. Anybody who claims that their ego has gone away is totally full of shit, right? You have tastes, you have preferences. The way that you explain this stuff comes from your own ego too, because I can't give you absolute truth. You have to find that within yourself. All I can do is basically just make this video, and you're going to look at me like this guy's, just telling me what he thinks, to put it nicely, to myself. I could have said something different there, but, I have an ego, or I have a sense of survival of making myself look good, right? I don't want to do other people's, work for them necessarily. So everybody has a desire to please their own ego. But that has nothing to do with absolute truth. Absolute truth is inside. But other people disagreeing with you isn't something that you're guarding against. It's something that you expect. Because you see that every ego is going to be different. This doesn't mean that you tolerate abuse necessarily. I mean, if somebody comes up to you and attacks you, you're going to be in a fight. Either you're going to run away or you're going to fight, right? So you can't, pretend like, if somebody came up to you and attacked you, you would just completely surrender and make it all go away just because you get into this fantasy world of being the absolute or something like that. It doesn't work like that, right? I mean, that's a fantasy. You can think that. There are egos who do, and I don't criticize fantasy necessarily, because I don't know how fantasy operates in your life. I can really only be concerned about how fantasy operates in my life. I guess first and foremost, because I can see fantasy. I'm the only person who can see fantasy for myself, right? The difference between fantasy and reality. And I don't know necessarily where the bright line is between those two sometimes. And if I can't even do that for myself, 100% certainty. How am I going to tell somebody else what their fantasy is? People have all kinds of different perspectives. Some people have God knows how many, whatever. So this is what opens the door to absolute love, though. Because you got to have absolute truth before you can really have absolute love. Because if you don't have absolute truth nailed down, then you're going to be comparative and insecure with regard to truth. And you're not going to move into love. You're going to be insisting that everybody agree with you. You got to get over that. Nobody's going to agree. Assume nobody's going to agree with you. Nor should they. Nor could they. If they do agree with you, that means that they're not thinking for themselves. Is that good? Maybe for you, but is that good for them? Is that going to help them find absolute truth? Right? Probably not. What that's going to make them do is just agree with you, which is only going to be what your ego wants. Right? Okay, friends, so hopefully I've kind of explained what absolute truth is here. And then in the second half of this video, I'll talk about absolute love. So just give me 1 second. Okay, friends, welcome back. So I think one of the first premises of absolute love is kind of the acceptance of ego. And how, really you should be focused on creating your own corner of reality where you are deserving, right? But you also need to relate with others as well. So ideally, this is a win-win relation. And this requires maturity and owning up to mistakes, no matter who is at fault, and forgiveness. Now, already there's going to be people who are going to be like, no, that's not what absolute love is. Absolute love is when you're entirely rid of ego. You're entirely unconditioned from ego. You realize that ego is an illusion, and you have no morality. And whatever happens, presumably, is good. That's not what I'm saying, right? See, that's what happens when you try to conflate love with truth. See, this is where I disagree with many of you guys. And I don't hold this against you, and hopefully you don't hold this against me. I've had some people say really nasty things to me here, like, oh, you're a devil or a demon or something like that, because you have the audacity to say that the ego exists. This is awful, right? But then, you just expect that people are going to do that. Like, once you realize absolute truth, you just expect that somebody's going to come out of the woodwork and say something nasty to you at some point in your life. But that shouldn't be something that destabilizes your truth if you have absolute truth. And now, does this mean that you tolerate abuse? No. See, this whole idea that there's no right and wrong, there's no morality. No, the reason why there's right and wrong is because you are an ego on some level. You have preferences, you have taste, right? You don't eat grass. You don't go outside and just start eating grass like a cat, right? A cat will go out and just eat grass, or a dog sometimes. Most human beings are not going to do that. Why? Because you don't want to eat grass. That's a weird example, but it just shows it. People have tastes and preferences. Let's say that you live in a house. You're not just going to go and live on the street, right? Because you have a preference of living in your house. You have a preference of eating clean food. You have a preference for drinking clean water. You have a preference for a certain kind of spiritual lingo, even. And there's nothing wrong with that. Other people do too. In fact, nobody agrees. See, as a matter of truth, nobody agrees, because every ego is a finite perspective and completely distinct from, it's an infinite network of perspectives, actually. Once you realize that, I think you have like the budding of the flower. So you can see the buds start to emerge of the flower of absolute love now. Because you're no longer trying to use your ego to share your truth with other people and pretend like it's absolute truth for them. See, if you're doing that, you're not going to have absolute love. But your ego's wearing the crown in that case. You're on the white horse, you're the white knight, and you want other people, you want fanboys or fangirls around you because you want to feel right. And actually what's going to happen is you're not going to see this as ego. In a twisted way, you're going to see this as you being unconditioned and leading people outside of ego. See, that's, in my opinion, that is what precludes love. Because, like with love, you basically have to assume that even you are a finite perspective on some level, and everybody else is too. And any kind of sharing of truth is going to be a finite perspective. And so really, imagine all of us are artists. You're not going to walk up to one artist and say, hey man, you should be just like me. In that case, they wouldn't be an artist. You just have a bunch of clones, right? You would have like a bunch of copies, actually. It would be like imagine Eddie Van Halen and a bunch of people pretending to be, a good example of this would be Elvis, right? You ever go to Las Vegas and see all the imitators of Elvis? So you had Elvis, and now you have all these people that are kind of miming Elvis. That's what you want. That's what your ego wants, is it wants a bunch of people mimicking you, right? And that gives you a sense that you're important. I'm the essence of all these other Elvises. So I must be, in a sense, kind of like the unconditioned Elvis. I'm the form of Elvis, and all these other representations of the form are basically like a mirror to me. They make me feel good. They keep my legacy alive, right? My survival alive as a legacy. And people seem to want to do this, which is the inverse, really, of spirituality and spiritual introspection. So what I tend to do is I tend to ask people, like, what is your truth? What is your spirituality? Because I realize it's always going to be a finite picture. Anything I say is always going to be a finite picture. So it'd be like Eddie Van Halen going up to somebody and saying, hey man, show me what you can do on guitar. Right? What can you do on guitar? And when that person goes, man, like, I want to play just like you, Eddie Van Halen would say, why? What is it about my playing that resonates with you? How do what is it about your style? Okay, can you imagine going to a vaudeville play and every actor is exactly the same? There'd be no drama. There'd be no interest. What makes a vaudeville play interesting is every character is different, right? You have the drunkard, you have the preacher, you have the mother, the father, the baby, right? The merchant, and then their relationships. That's what creates the drama. That's what creates reality. Is the beauty of that relation. So that gets into beauty. I did a video already on absolute beauty. So, comes after absolute love. So absolute love, in a way, is kind of right in the middle between absolute truth and absolute beauty. But ultimately, I think absolute love, there's a few things I can say about absolute love. One is everything you say that you're sharing with other people is groupthink. It's already groupthink, right? Because you're communicating it from one finite perspective to another finite perspective. And every finite perspective is going to be different, including your own. And your own views about truth are not absolute truth. They're groupthink. Even if you're communicating them to yourself, it's still groupthink. That's a relationship between you and you. It's like standing in the mirror talking to yourself, right? I mean, that's not what absolute truth is. Absolute truth is the spiritual pillar within yourself that is totally safe from any kind of finite perspective. Although you may watch yourself react anyway, obviously. And so what absolute love is, it's not about radical relativity. It's not about there is no morality. That assumes that the finite perspectives are an illusion, which is a mistake in Advaita Vedanta, actually, from my point of view. And actually, it's not even a mistake. I mean, even Shankara realized that there were kind of two aspects to truth. There's the practical and the absolute, right? So it's only really radical interpreters of Advaita Vedanta who seem to think somehow that the mundane is unreal. But there are going to be finite perspectives that have this point of view. Why would you let this unsettle you spiritually? This should not unsettle you spiritually. You may get frustrated by it because you want to be agreed with and you don't want to be disagreed with. You may move away from that relation, but that shouldn't destabilize your spirituality. If that's the case, what that tells me is that you don't really have a strong sense of absolute truth yet. So this is why absolute truth is a prerequisite to absolute love. And so then absolute love is kind of like right treatment of other people. Like, I expect that I'm going to disagree with people. I expect other people are going to disagree with me. But the higher relation is to hold that all together. And only somebody who has integrated absolute love can actually do that. Right? Like, okay, we can disagree, but, kind of reminds me when people used to say, oh yeah, the ideal version of Congress that people sometimes will say. I don't think this ever was the case, but like, Congress could sit and fight with each other, and then everybody goes to the bar after and has a drink and just laughing together, right? Like a debate, like people debating like on Crossfire or something like that, a real hardcore debate. And then after the debate, everybody goes bowling, right? And just has a great time. And, it's like you can fight and then celebrate as friends after the fight, right? That's kind of like what absolute love is. That you can hold relation with a capital R. You're assuming that you, other people, it's all going to be different. And anything you say is not going to be absolute truth. And anything anybody else says is not going to be absolute truth. That absolute truth can only be something that is found within. Absolute truth has nothing to do with relation. That's love. Right? So this makes sense. A lot of people think, oh, there is no separate self, and that's the absolute truth. No, the problem with that, though, is like, if you're not clear about what you are, how could you be clear about what a relation is? Right? It's like you're trying to make the relation the ontological standing ground. Trying to make the relation absolute truth. Well, the problem there is that you're being asked basically to kind of ignore your own individuality there, and nobody does that. Because finite perspectives are real. Egos are real. Open your eyes, right? Don't pretend like something is not real. See? So there is an issue with fantasy. Being able to determine the difference between fantasy and accuracy. Even though there might not be a bright line between the two necessarily. But I also want to make the point that there's going to be a preference in absolute love too. Like if somebody comes on the bus and has really bad breath and is sitting right next to you, right? You're not going to be seen as wrong to like get up and move to another seat, right? So don't pretend like absolute love is some kind of an absence of ego. It's a higher level relation that actually incorporates all egos or all surviving systems, finite perspectives, including your own. Okay, friends? Hopefully this doesn't sound too preachy, but it's just, I wanted to give an introduction to my version of absolute love. Okay, friends? I'll talk to you next week. Take care.